International Media TV. Television that listens to you.
Hi, I'm Johnnie Burrell. Welcome to the program.
We're a call and response community. And I need you to work with something with me here. There's a little song, it goes like this. It says, oh yeah, hey ya, oh yeah, hey ya, oh yeah, hey ya, hallelujah. That's it. Now when I say oh yeah, hey ya, then you do the response. Okay? Oh yeah, hey ya. Oh yeah, hey ya. Oh yeah, hey ya. Oh yeah, hey ya. Hallelujah. It simply means praising the Spirit. That's all it means. My name is Reverend Perry to my friends, and I am honored, and it's a blessing to be here to offer an invocation, a libation ritual, and a prayer for this occasion. The ancestors taught us that it is always appropriate to honor the spirit, and that it is also appropriate to honor the seed from the fruit of the womb from which we have come. Today, we want to honor Mother Africa and the children of the diaspora who took the discard and made art out of it, who used their imaginations to soar to new heights. Oh, yeah, hey, yeah. 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 Hallelujah. Hallelujah. I want to read to you from the works of Dr. Howard Thurman for our invocation. Dr. Thurman was a mystic, a theologian who lived here in San Francisco. He's written over 22 books. The reading that I want to excerpt from is called On Viewing the Coast of Africa. And I want you to listen with your ears and with your hearts. Across these waters, how many years ago they came? What were their inchoate mutterings, locked tight within the circle of their hearts? In the deep, heavy darkness of the foul-smelling ship, where they could not see the sky, nor hear the night noises, nor feel the warm compassion of the tribe, they held their breath against the agony of it all. How does the human spirit accommodate itself to such desolation? How did they? What tools of the spirit were in their hands with which to cut a path through the wilderness of their despair? Oh, my fathers, what was it like to be stripped of all supports of life save the beating of the heart and the ebb and flow of fetid air in the lungs? In a strange moment, when you suddenly caught your breath, did some intimation from the future give to your spirits a hint of promise? In the darkness, did you hear the silent feet of your children beating a melody of freedom to words which you would never know? Oh, yeah, hey, yeah. 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 Hallelujah. In the African tradition, one of the rituals that is done on occasions such as this is called the pouring of libation. And there's still a call and response piece that goes with it. The word ashe, can you say ashe with me? Ashe. It simply means agreement. It is like saying amen. And when I say ashe, if you agree, then you should say ashe as well. Ashe. Ashe. We're going to pour libation in 3 parts today. And the libation that we're going to use is simply water. We were nurtured in the womb with water. 80% of our bodies are water. Water is sacred. The first part, we pour this libation for the Mayafa, for those who came across the waters, on whose shoulders we stand. Ashe. Ashe. We pour the second libation for those who are living, for those who are standing, for those who are still fighting for justice. Ashe. Ashe. And we pour the third libation for those yet to be born, for those who will eat the fruits of the seeds that we have planted and will sing a new song. Ashe. Ashe. Oh, yeah, hey, yeah. 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 Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Let's take a collective breath in and let it out. And I offer this blessing, this word of prayer. O thou who created us all, thou who lives in and moves through all of creation, thou who connects us one to the other. We remember the Ma'afa today. We remember the middle passage. We remember the ancestors. And we give thanks. We give thanks for the dancers, for the artists, for those who found a new way to speak their truth. We give thanks for them today. We bless this occasion. And we bless all of those who are gathered around and are yet to come. Let everyone that walked through this exhibit be inspired. Let the quilts that hang on the wall warm your souls. Let the ashes that hang from the ceiling spark new hope in your hearts. And may the light and love of God continue to shine on us undimmed, allowing us to love ourselves and each other as you do. Ashe, Ashe. And so it is. Amen. Amen. Oh, yeah, hey, yeah. 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 Hallelujah.
Hallelujah. First of all, I want to thank Pope Flynn, the best drummer anywhere around. And I want to invite you to be sure, if you haven't seen it, to get to the exhibit. And shortly, Danny Glover is going to be downstairs and is just saying hello.
I'm just saying hello. I've lived near the DeYoung Museum or some manifestation of it for almost 60 years. And what a pleasure to be here, to be a part of this extraordinary exhibition and exhibit, and to have you here as we look at art through the eyes, through the culture of people who are often not renowned for their work as artists, but whose living art is about their life, their work, and their love of who they are and where they are. Thank you.
Join us downstairs at 1:30 for the panel discussion. If you have tickets, we'd love to have you fill the Correct Auditorium.
Hello and welcome. My name is Max Hollein. I'm the director here of the Fine Arts Museums, and I want to welcome you all to this panel discussion. A panel discussion which celebrates the opening day of a very important exhibition. We called it Revelations, Art from the African American South. It's a celebration of an important exhibition, but probably more importantly, it's also a celebration of a major acquisition for our collection 62 works that have entered our collection in the last couple of months. But most importantly, this is a celebration about the artists and for the artists, whose work from now on will forever be part not only of our collection, but will be part of the museum's narrative and focus about what modern and contemporary American art is, what it is about, and how it should be represented. I want to thank many people who have made the exhibition possible, who have made the acquisition possible, and who have basically kind of supported the artists throughout the years. And I want to especially thank, of course, Bill Arnett, who's kind of, I would say, visionary spirit and visionary collecting and understanding of the art kind of brought the whole collection together, from which we now as institutions can basically kind of pull and really be able to kind of properly represent this art to a wider audience and public. I want to thank the entire Souls Going Deep Foundation. I want to, of course, thank also the artists who are here, especially Lonnie Holley, who's opened actually the exhibition yesterday evening also with a great concert. I want to thank also the scholars Paul Arnett and Jacqueline Francis who are here and will join us for the panel discussion. Special thanks also go to Tim Bugard, our curator in charge of American art, who's been instrumental in bringing this collection here to the Fine Arts Museums and who has been the curator of this exhibition. I want to thank the trustees of the Fine Arts Museums who have done really a tremendous, I would say, kind of vote of confidence for this art and for this acquisition. To thank especially our president, Didi Wilsey, for supporting the acquisition and also the exhibition in a major way. And special gratitude also goes to Belva Davis, trustee of the Fine Arts Museums, who has been really the very good spirit of this whole endeavor, and also of right now kind of moving this exhibition for the next 10 months, not only through the museum, but actually really embracing a very wide audience with that. And that goes along with the help of the SF Links. So I thank you so much for that. I want to also thank especially also actors and directors Danny Glover and Delroy Lindo for being here today and kind of giving basically the welcoming remarks and the closing remarks of this panel. So it's my great pleasure to welcome to the podium a native San Franciscan, a visitor to the Young Museum from childhood on, as he told me, a distinguished actor, obviously film director, humanitarian and political activist, Danny Glover. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I mean, the moment that you have an exhibition such as this, a transformative exhibition such as this, you think about all those who've been involved in bringing this moment. It is, in some sense, a revelation. The revelation of stories, the memory of stories from beyond the artists themselves, the collection of emotions and ideas, fears, desires, dreams, and all. This is what this work represents, is all of this work. We get a chance to see it now in this kind of rawness, in this feeling of this sense. It may be referred to as folk art, but it is the transcending experience of men and women, their collective experience. It may be Lonnie's individual image that he draws on from that, but that just image comes from a culture, a much larger context, a historical context, a social context, a political context as well. And so we see another way in which we get to experience another way in which the world of people see themselves in the world. What is culture? What is art? It's simply the expression of how people see themselves in their everyday life, in their everyday existence. That's what it is in some sense. We see this in a sense. For me personally, there were moments of memory. I had the fortune of being born in San Francisco here, but for the first 3.5 years of my life, more than 2 years of that was spent in my grandmother's and grandfather's farm in rural Georgia. So when I see the revelation here of this experience here that we have the privilege of seeing here at the De Young Museum, I think about my grandparents. I think about my mother. I think about my mother's 94-year-old cousin, Fanny, who's alive today, or her 98-year-old cousin, who is Sue Bell, and their experience. So the art itself is tied directly to life experience of love, of triumph, of joy, of pain, of pathos. All those things are inhibited here, right here in this art. It's a pleasure, as I said, to be here, the opening of the program, Revelations, the seeds for the collaboration of the fine art, and the Souls Grown Deep Foundation collaboration. I love that, Souls Grown Deep. You know, sounds like Langston Hughes. Souls gone deep. My soul is gone deep like the rivers. I've known rivers older than the, whew. This collaboration of fine arts and the Souls Grown Deep Foundation collaboration were planted decades ago with Timothy Bugard, curator. For Revelations was the first introduced in this style of creativity. The success of the foundations, G-Ben's quilts exhibits here at the De Young Museum led to a long romance with hopes of acquiring a meaningful collection. Those hopes came to fruition and led to a marriage. This fabulous exposition is installed upstairs in the American galleries. I need to acknowledge, first of all, so many people, as I said, there's so many people who've brought this together, you know, in the Board of Trustees of the Souls Grown Deep Foundation. And could they stand, if the board members are here, and give them applaud the board members? Yes, thank you. Also, Tim, he's here. Timothy, please. There he is right there. Yeah. He'll tell you more about the foundation later during the panel discussion. They're members of the Fine Arts Board of Trustees and Foundations. Dee Dee, she's here, Dee Dee? Come on, where you at? Stand up, don't Jack Calhoun, of course, Belva Davis. And Carl Pascarella. Is he here? Is that, no man, you and me, always, man. Long history. And George Hexer, Brilliant Acquisitions Chairman, and Alice Hoffman, Chair of the California-Hawaii Conference of the NAACP, and I have to acknowledge my best friend in life, not the fact that we do the same profession, my best friend in life, Delroy Lindo. So, our program, I guess, begins. Who do I introduce now? Come on up here, Timothy.
Thank you.
All right.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Fine Arts Museums. It's a pleasure to have you to celebrate the opening of Revelations. I want to start by introducing our panelists. Lonnie Holley is one of America's greatest contemporary artists, as those of you who've been through the galleries already know. Born in Birmingham, Alabama, Lonnie traveled across the South and held a wide range of jobs before making his first artwork at the age of 29. His first works were sculptures carved from industrial sandstone, but since then he's found artistic inspiration in almost every possible material. His work combines old materials with the aim of creating new narratives, often with an object lesson built in. Lonnie's interdisciplinary practice encompasses drawing, painting, sculpture, photography, and as many of you know, having listened in the gallery, music. He has 2 recorded albums, Just Before Music and Keeping a Record of It, both released by Dust to Digital Records. Paul Arnett is, since his graduation at Harvard with a degree in art history, has been the co-curator with his father, Bill Arnett, who you see on the screen behind us, of the art collection that became the Souls Grown Deep Foundation collection. He's a recognized authority on the work of Southern artists. He served as co-editor and contributor to numerous books on the subject, including the 2-volume Souls Grown Deep African American Vernacular Art, The Quilts of Gee's Bend, The Architecture of the Quilt, and Thornton Dial in the 21st Century. He's contributed to many catalogs and organized several exhibitions, including Thornton Dial's Strategy of the World. Jacqueline Francis, on my left, is an art historian specializing in American art of the 20th century and contemporary African diasporic art. Her book, Making Race, Modernism, and Racial Art in America, was published in 2012. She's a co-editor of Romery Bearden, American Modernist, and her essays have been published in numerous significant books, including The Image of the Black in Western Art, The Encyclopedia of Aesthetics, and Horace Pippin, The Way I See It. In San Francisco, she's on the boards of the 3.9 Artist Collective and the Queer Cultural Center. She's an associate professor in visual and critical studies, as well as painting, drawing, and sculpture at the California College of the Arts. So I want to welcome all of our panelists. So I want to start with an apology and regarding Louisiana Bendoff had hoped to be with us, the Gee's Bend quilter, whose works are included in the very beautiful print exhibition upstairs. She couldn't be with us today. She has a very serious family illness and had to cancel at the last moment, so we send her our prayers and good wishes. I want to start before asking specific questions of the panelists by noting a couple of things. One is that in the past few weeks there have been 2 nooses left at the National Museum of African History and Culture and at the Hirshhorn Museum in Washington, D.C. These examples of continuing, ongoing racism prove, as if we needed proof, that these artists, their subjects, and their lives and their experiences are more relevant than ever. It's worth recalling the famous quote from writer William Faulkner, who actually lived in a former slave plantation mansion, who of course said, "The past is never dead, it isn't even past." All of these works in this exhibition grow out of a collective experience, as Danny Glover said, and as if the artists themselves know better than anyone. The 4 major experiences are the African diaspora, when 400,000 Africans were taken from Africa by force and brought to this country, the slavery system that flourished till the end of the Civil War, at which point there were 4 million African Americans enslaved in this country, divided families, brutalized by this system, Jim Crow segregation, which institutionalized racism throughout the South, and I would note also had counterparts in the North and the West. And last but not least, most importantly, the modern civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s. All of these artists took this shared collective experience spanning from African roots to the Jim Crow South and to the Civil Rights era South, and experimented and appropriated and embraced unusual art materials, at least to the world around them, if not to themselves, including tree roots and branches, including found object assemblage, and including the famous Southern Yard Show. And they embraced and critiqued and examined some of the most profound and persistent issues in American society. They include race and class and religion and gender. It is an extraordinary cultural accomplishment, and one, as Max has said and other people have said today, that's now being rewritten into the American art history where it always was, but now will be fully acknowledged and fully see the light of day. So I want to start, as we always should, with the artist, Lonnie Holley, because he has more to say than anyone, and I think he knows more than anyone. And I want to ask Lonnie to talk a little bit about how you became an artist and how that experience changed your life.
First of all, I would like to just thank the Museum for allowing me to be here today, along with William Arnett, the person that is responsible for the works being saved. For one thing, as an artist, I think we are chosen in a sense. And you asked me when did I become an artist or when I began doing my art. I think I began doing my art when I was told to get out of the damn house and go dig worms at 5 years old. Go up and down the ditches and the creeks digging worms. I actually really started turning over the stones, the broken glass, the leaves, the broken branches, everything that would float on down that ditch or down those creeks. And after getting older, I went back to those ditches and creeks the way my grandfathers had walked and took a shortcut on the way to work to Sloss Furnace, uptown Birmingham, Alabama. And I just chose to use the ditches and the creeks as a way, because I had learned to love to do something. At 5 years old, I was out doing work, picking up paper for the drive-in theater, picking up paper at the state fairground and all these other places. I was learning to look in those bags and unravel that wrinkled paper, or seeing the condition that in the deterioration of what the rain washed off and put it up against the fence and it begins to rot away. I examined those conditions. I can only say that I was an artist when I was a child, but I didn't know the word art. I didn't know how to spell art. I didn't know how to spell sculpture. So sculpture wasn't a part of what Negroes knew to proclaim. You got to remember, I'm the seventh of my mother's 27 children, and I was born in the era of a Negro, a little baby Negro. So I don't have a problem with that. What I do have a problem with is that people will put me in a category and not see me as an American artist, because I experienced America's habits from a very, very, very young age, and then later was given the title an African-American artist by the Lords of London, because some works of mine was going to be going on an exhibit called More Than Land and Sky, Art from Appalachia. That's how I come to be who I am.
Paul, I already mentioned your father, Bill Arnett, who's here in the audience, and the legacy that he and your family have built is astonishing, and it is finally moving into major museum collections like the DeYoung. And I just wonder if you could briefly, for the audience, describe how and why your father and all of you began collecting the works that form the basis of the collection, and what your hopes were for it. Were they always the same at the beginning, or have they morphed over time?
Okay, well, this will be my longest speech, but it's a big question. I grew up in a house with thousands upon thousands of artworks from all over the world, civilizations going back to Mesopotamia. Most of what my dad was interested in the 70s was art from sub-Saharan Africa. And he really, except for the African collection, he had collected most of the other work himself in the field and traveling to what I think today is 80 or more countries. So he used to tell us the hottest places on earth are Baghdad and the Khyber Pass, two places you can't go today to collect art. So he collected civilizations, really. He wanted to show overviews panoramically and in depth of what various societies throughout history had done. And so as his health deteriorated in the 80s, he was unable to travel very, very far and wide. And he started to look around the South, and probably because of his expertise in African art. He was intrigued by some of the self-taught African American artists in the South, and just kind of was collecting, but really on just a hobbyist level. Then he met Lonnie, and when he went to Lonnie's place, he said to Lonnie, "The only place I've been on earth that even rivals your outdoor art environment is Borobudur." And at that point, he began to realize that there were some true big genius minds at work with little or no recognition, and certainly no patronage or assistance, and no financial resources whatsoever. Lonnie actually then, and I know discovery is a loaded term, but Lonnie soon thereafter discovered a guy that was making fishing lures named Thornton Dial, and put a fishing lure up in his living room after meeting him. My dad saw the fishing lure and said, "Who did that?" Lonnie said, "I don't know. I met him, and he just makes fishing lures." And my dad said, it looked like a little de Kooning fishing lure. And so my dad said, "Whoever made that is an artisan. I have to meet him immediately." And so once he started to add people like Thornton Dial and Lonnie to the other art my dad was collecting, a few things happened. First, that fishing lure, that was bait for me as someone who visited home right before I was about to graduate college and said, oh my God, what are you into here? Then you start to realize that the people were repositories of history, as Tim alluded to. These were people who had grown up in Jim Crow, and they had straddled these two eras, both this almost draconian medieval world of enforced inferiority, and then transitioning through World War II and the Civil Rights Movement and the migrations that occurred out of the countryside and into the cities, ending up in many cases as urbanites with industrial type jobs, and living through the Civil Rights Movement. So these people embodied much of what is important in retrospect about 20th century America. So their ability to bear witness to the truth of history was incontestable. And then we began to realize that, the work was aesthetically strong and it was formally mature. It really didn't conform to any definitions of folk art or primitive art. It was intimately bound up with social change, and that is so rare that any art is legitimately a part of and made by the people who benefit from social change. It's almost unprecedented. Thirdly, it's the people who have been historically one of America's 2 or 3 most dispossessed, oppressed peoples. And then fourthly, it was almost completely unknown outside of the places where it was being made. And so it was like, if we don't do it, what's going to happen to it? And so I think very quickly, this is 1986, 87, we realized it was a big job, and that ultimately, even though it would begin as a private collection, it would end up in the public domain. So that's where it all comes from.
Jacqueline, I wanted to ask you, you've written about the African-American artist Horace Pippin, as we heard in your introduction, and as we all know, and we have a painting in our collection, very beautiful painting of John Brown's Trial, that hangs in our permanent collection, thanks to the Rockefellers, who, like many people, embraced so-called folk art. I am putting it in quotations. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit, since you are an authority on Horace Pippin and this time period, about the construction of terms such as folk, naive. More recently, we've heard terms like outsider. You want to ask outside of what? These are all terms that are loaded, and this is part of museology. It's part of art history. It's part of academia. These terms get passed around. They're rarely coined by the people that they're applied to, even with mainstream modernist art like Cubism or Fauvism or whatever it might be. So I'm wondering if you could talk about it, because these terms were often used, on the one hand, both to promote, but often with a condescending air of patronization, both patronizing in terms of being patrons and buying their works like the Rockefellers, but always with a double edge that somehow they weren't part of the mainstream story.
Well, I think I'd go back before the 20th century and think about the 19th century use of this word folk, which comes from its German ancestor, Volk. And there was a philosopher, humanist called Gottfried von Herder, who spoke about the folk in what might seem celebrating ways, that every people's had their culture, every person was part of a community, and every community was contributing to the idea of the nation or the nation state. And, you know, this is a pretty radical idea for the 19th century in terms of, you know, empires and certain kinds of aristocratic rule being toppled or at least being threatened. And artists are picking up on this, that is to say European artists are picking up on this as well. Artists like Kandinsky and his partner Gabriel Munter are looking at what they call folk art, things like glass painting and Russian votives. And this kind of coincides with the time period in which artists are questioning their academic training. They're saying that our scholastic studies in the academies in England, in France, in Germany, have actually in some ways made us forget why people make art, forget about the excitement of discovery, forget about the things that might energize our audiences. And in fact, they too start looking at these artists who are called folk artists or self-taught artists or vernacular artists. This is part of Cubism's story, it's part of Fauvism's story, it's part of what we know as, you know, the School of Paris and early modernism. Picasso looked at a self-taught painter named Henri Rousseau, who was a working man in Paris in France, and said, this is the artist that I'm looking at. So when we look at photographs of the studios of people like Apollinaire or Matisse or Picasso, what we see in the background is not only non-Western art from Africa, from Oceania, from Asia, and from the Americas, but we also see things that might be seen as everyday objects that they are curious about for their form. And that's the other thing, is they're learning something about form. They're very interested in these artist stories as being artists that are not like them, that is to say, artists who are trained in academies. But they're also interested in the form. They're interested in a kind of modernism that's simplifying the body, that's simplifying the space, that's flattening in terms of painting the pictorial space. They're interested in angularity and geometry, and that they're learning from sculpture as well. So, you know, long before we start talking about Horace Pippin or even someone like William Edmondson, who was the first African-American artist to have a one-artist exhibition at the Metropolitan Museum in the 1930s. Not any of his contemporaries who went to art school, like Charles Alston or Hale Woodruff, or Romare Bearden, who studied with Georg Gross at the Art Students League. The first artist of African descent to have a solo show at a major museum in New York was William Edmondson, who was making gravestones for his community in Nashville, Tennessee. So they were looking at something saying, you know, is this person is he our Brancusi in a way? You know, is he our modernist that is local? And you mentioned the Rockefellers because, of course, like Hamilton Easter Field and artists like Yasuo Kuniyoshi, Abby Aldrich Rockefeller was very interested in what she thought was the first American artist, that is to say self-taught artists who were doing things in painting, who were making weather vanes, etc. And that was one of her sort of raison d'etres as a collector.
Paul, I wanted to ask you, because the issue has now come up a couple of times about early modernism. Expressionism would be an obvious example of looking at these kinds of works. About the issue of African history, African heritage. Many viewers, I know you've mostly or all of you have been through the exhibition, and both scholars and first-time viewers often feel a deep connection. On some level, they can't quite identify some resonance with African art and culture. This is a very complicated subject in the literature. Paul and his father and others have written very beautifully and in depth about it. So again, in another shorthand answer after your long and well-footnoted essays, I'm just wondering if you could talk for the audience a little bit about this very complex issue of how and whether or not there may be links to Africa in many of these works, many of these histories, many of these cultures and communities, and whether they're verifiable or whether they are there but somehow ultimately somewhat intangible and you can't connect all the links, but you know they're there. You know, perhaps there is a missing link that will be discovered, but you also see them in objects. We all think about objects that are pretty well known, whether it's the cast iron, wrought iron work in grill work in New Orleans or in Charleston, seagrass baskets off the coast of South Carolina and Georgia, face jugs from near Edgeville, South Carolina. These often seem to have Africanisms in them, and often there are objects cited in Africa, but I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about it. It's an incredibly fascinating subject that I think everyone is immediately drawn to.
It's a little like politics or religion. It's subjective, I think. The two most serious African art scholars that I've known, one of whom was named Roy Sieber, who was maybe the dean of the study of African art in this country, and was a personal friend of my father's, and he wrote for our books, and he said he didn't see a single thing that was specifically African in any of it. So that's one extreme, and that's a very expert opinion. The other is Robert Ferris Thompson, who many of us have heard of at Yale, who's written extensively about the transmissions of these kinds of forms and ideas across the diaspora, and he believes that probably every piece in that exhibition is chock full of African retentions. I'll give an example where the Gee's Bend exhibition is concerned. I was the editor of the book, and the way that I cut this baby in half was to say that no one would be allowed to write about anything that they couldn't verify that the woman who made the quilt didn't know. And it was a way of sort of, in a kind of postmodern way, limiting the debate to keep politics out, to keep cultural politics out, to keep beliefs and possibly even projections that we have out. I think, and I think that was probably part of the success of the show, is it enabled people to focus on the women, their relationships, how they transmitted ideas, not how ideas might have been transmitted to them from some place immemorial in the past. I think the difficulty with African retentions is that really no one has ever demonstrated how they are transmitted. And I think that's what you were talking about. It's a kind of mysterious endurance, but the historical record is so patchy. I mean, here's something to think about. Those Gee's Bend quilts represent one community of a few hundred women. And so let's say a few thousand women have lived there during the 20th century. A few thousand remained of what were probably 100,000 quilts from one little community. Multiply that by thousands of other similar communities throughout the Southeast. We have hundreds of millions of quilts that disappeared. So most of what we're dealing with is like an archaeological record that is so incomplete, and it's a function of the tragedy of racism and poverty and all kinds of other social forces that have conspired to prevent millions of artworks from living. So that makes me very conservative in the way that I look at these. But they're clearly there, in my opinion. It's just, I can only sound like the way your question, I can just sound like your question.
Or intelligent, yeah. Jacqueline, I wanted to ask you a similar question about African heritage, which is the last gallery in the exhibition, which many of you may have noticed, not only includes artists from this collection, including Lonnie Holley's incredible piece, Myth, but also a Purvis Young, A Good Man, but then other works by African artists like Alanet Sui, contemporary artists like Robert Colescott, and so forth. So it's an attempt to integrate these new acquisitions into a permanent collection of contemporary art. But one of the issues that immediately comes up, whether it's by Robert Colescott or Kara Walker, who's also in the gallery, or Jacob Lawrence, which is not in the gallery, and on, the Horace Pippin, and so forth, As you just mentioned, the first major exhibition at a major New York museum was William Edmondson, who was considered at the time a folk artist. And every artist of the 20th century that I'm aware of, and even some in the 19th, like Henry Ossawa Tanner and so forth, had to wrestle with the issue of whether or not their subject matter should be overtly, explicitly African American. And in the 20th century, in the late 20th century, even in my lifetime as a curator and scholar, what I have seen is the initial hurdles were overcome largely with art that was the most explicitly African American subject matter, thus somewhat, again, doubly marginalizing artists who were African American and may have been very proud of their heritage or had very deep and resonant history like all of us do, but they couldn't be anything other than the identity that the Metropolitan or MoMA or the Whitney or even the DeYoung or whatever museum might be wanted them to be, which was recognizably African American. Artists who want to work conceptually, with installation art, with abstraction, talk in their oral history interviews about a very tough road they had to hoe, not fitting what was in with mainstream American museums. So I wonder if you could talk about that with the artists that you've worked with, how they wrestle with this issue. Do I have to be something that either I don't want to be or that I'm not?
Yeah, this is a long and ongoing discussion, and I certainly can't begin to so-called answer it. I mean, all I can say is that all of these artists, all artists, I mean, not just artists who are black, all artists want their work to be recognized, they want their work to be exhibited. I mean, yes, there are artists who are hermits, who do not want any part of the world, who work in secret. Paul and Bill Arnett have written about them, people like James Hampton, working in Washington, D.C., in a garage that he rented, and where he worked on this huge installation piece that wasn't discovered until after he died, after he passed away. So here was an artist who's considered a folk artist and yet wouldn't meet the basic requirement, which is you're making an art for a community that is consuming it, right? So Hampton is an exception to that rule. He's not showing his work to anyone. And to get back to your question, that is also the question of audiences. And I use that word in the plural sense because there are many audiences for many different artists. So the DeYoung is an audience. We're an audience here today. There's also an audience that is outside in Golden Gate Park who presumably we want to come in and see Lonnie's work as well as see the work of Joan Brown and see the work of Stuart Davis and the other artists in this institution. So artists are trying to develop as big and broad and plural an audience as they can. And that is the dilemma, is to not just imagine one audience, but to imagine that art can somehow communicate or in some ways engage many audiences. And the problem that you've sort of identified is the presumption that these artists were wrestling with was that there's only one audience for you. Not only are you singular, but there's only one audience for you. It is a certain demographic that is a bunch of certain characteristics that are like on a census form. And we know that to not be true. I mean, we know that about music, we know that about theater, we know that about literature.
Lonnie, in a similar way, I'm wondering if you could talk about what the idea of Africa does or doesn't mean in your work. Is it something, sort of memory and heritage from the past? Is it something that feels relevant and something, a touchstone for you today? Is it an abstract idea? Is it a real idea? Intellectual, emotional?
You gotta remember, well, I have to remember in order to help you all understand what was going on as far as developing brain development into the art world, or how after being a victim of the art establishments and how the treatment, again, we were talking about the creators, and were they interested in somebody seeing it then, or was it that I would do this for my grandmother to see, or after my grandmother and my mother was dead, I would say to their spirit, are you watching me? As I create this, I would say to my grandpa, I'm going to take this old chicken house dough and this old chair you sit in, and I'm going to make something to say, thank you, Grandpa, for watching over the chicken house and not letting whatever destroy the eggs or the chicken. So then when Bill comes along and sees this and asks Lonnie, why did you do this? And I say, that's honoring my granddaddy. Or to take this wreck that my grandmother took and wrecked out of the landfill hot pit. The wreck that I found was still hers, but remembering the long stick that she attached to it to get this stuff out of a burning pit, I actually were visualizing her still reaching down in that pit, doing something for me and the other 10 children that she actually was going to the city dump to work for. I was one, my father's child. Uncle Jesse had 10 children. So grandmother's responsibility were to take care of all 11 of us. You understand what I'm saying? So my whole thing were, when I, again, when I got into their life, I had learned so much from 5 years old, picking up paper, growing up through whatever I had to grow up through. I didn't get back to my grandmother. I'm trying to speed this up, or I won't take up too much of your time. I didn't get back into her life until I was turning 15, because I had been taken off the streets at 11 years old, put in an institution or put into a slave camp for children called Alabama Industrial School for Negro Children. There I had went through the whole 9 yards of agriculture, learning to pick, to harvest, learning to plant, learning to flat weed with a hoe, learning to do all these things. But again, I hadn't lost the focus on wanting to get to mother, or wanting to get to my family, which my mother had 27 children. I'm being the only child in a whiskey house. I'm being told you got a lot of brothers and sisters. My focus point was getting to my mother, getting to my family. So now after doing this, you got to remember, I had a memory build, or a way of building memory by objectivity. Up and down the ditch, I knew how, when I placed this rock here and I came back and I saw that the water didn't wash that rock away, I know that the harder things are harder for the water to flush. I'm learning flush off of human waste. So these things, again, the ditch that I found the wreck in was right in the back of where my grandmother lived. So I was always around these ditches and creeks that flushes off human waste. So to take something that is, again, landfill, how can the Spirit use me to talk about trash, garbage, and debris that we have maximized now to the point of you seeing New York City's landfill, California's, Los Angeles landfill, San Francisco's landfill. I'm talking about waste that is going to be, again, ghostly to our existence. This stuff is not going nowhere. It's not deteriorating. The only thing that I'm doing, or my life has done, is do the same thing that my grandmother was doing, but my grandmother didn't know nothing about being an artist. The only thing she knew, she was getting something out of the fiery pit. She was balling it up and putting it in a barrel. What I did, I took that she had balled up, take it out of the barrel, and I made her a beautiful butterfly. And I made her cry about it. And when I saw her cry about my butterfly, no one told me that I was an artist. No one no one even knew what I was doing. He just hauling in all that trash, that garbage, that junk. He got all that stuff around him. You understand what I'm saying? But it took William Arnett to come along. I'm building this environment of all this stuff, all these memories of all these people that loved me, that cared for me. And I'm only doing something to say, this is Miss Sarah Kelly's Delroy. This is Miss Smith, protecting myself the best that I can. Just some sticks in a drain pipe. That she told me, she said, instead of me getting a gun, I'll take some out of that drain pipe and I'll beat the hell out of somebody that break in on me. You understand what I'm saying? But that added value to me and also taught me this woman's mentality about being faithful to not to kill or not to hurt. But I'm going to take that out of that and I'm going to teach you a lesson about abuse. You understand what I'm saying? So these were things that I was gathering around that had taught me, that had retaught me a lesson about lessons that they had learned. The only thing that I'm doing is taking him and her hold the root, the pillow that's in the chair, but you got to see the chair, the condition of the chairs. Because one of those chairs, one of the rocker is not even on it. And on the same leg there, the father's rocker, the rocker is broken, the thing that allowed the chair to rock. So I took the chair, a woman, and put it on the handle as a support. You got to look at all of this. My thing is that I'm trying to show conditioning to make him and her, and then I placed the root in this to see that both of them, and you don't have to be married, but we do have to create a relationship where we are together raising the whole of humanity, which is the root. Small roots as well as the larger root. The larger root is showing from Africa from which it comes. I don't know whether I'm connecting or am I disconnecting. But I knew later that I took a DNA test and I found out that my mother's lineage is Yoruba. She's from the Yoruba tribe of Nigeria. It was like, okay. It was like, for me to find that out, not only did it put the crown on that I needed. I'm not nobody's king, but I did need a kingdom. I did need a throne. You understand what I'm saying? Mama giving birth to 27 children out of 32 pregnancies, it must have been something that was governing this woman to let that much of human flesh come from her. That's that much. You were talking about the honesty of me as an artist. I did a song called On the Other Side of the Pulpit. I'm on the other side of the pulpit. I cannot be your regular preacher. I can't be your regular minister. I got too much garbage, trash, and junk. I got the waste of technology. I got Code to the Mama to deal with. Code to the Mama is computer technology management. Excuse me, but that's where I'm at right now. I didn't mean to take that long to answer your question.
It's the best answer. Paul, every viewer of the exhibition is struck, obviously, by the extraordinary use of objects like natural tree roots and branches, like Lonnie just said. It's up on the screen. All of you probably noticed already. But also man-made objects, recycled from junk piles. So I'm wondering if you can talk about a little bit the historical origins and sort of uses of these materials in Africa and in African-American culture in the South. I realize a very quick overview, but just to give a feeling for the audience, since you have written so extensively about this, about how deeply resonant it is and meaningful, symbolic.
First of all, thank you for giving me the privilege of following Lonnie. My revenge is forthcoming. Well, you trapped me because I had said I can't make definitive connections between Africa and the New World, any more than anyone can make those connections. That's a hard question, so I'll avoid part of it and talk about what I know the artists do and what I know they believe they're doing. And you've heard Lonnie approach the world around him in a very metaphorical and metonymic way, seeing not only in the natural world, but in the man-made world, images of the self and the culture, and especially this process of use, what we call it, use, refuse, and reuse. And that there's obviously a spiritual and a redemptive quality to that. So the ability to make images of the self, to make images of the ancestors, to make images of the community, to make images, I think most importantly, of the future, out of this cycle of use, disuse, and reuse, can be very powerful. It's also a way of saying very controversial and even dangerous things in a completely opaque way, which I'm quite certain goes back to the earliest days of the African presence in the New World, where their selfhood was removed. They were turned into property, and the penalty for any kind of rebellion, whether it was intellectual or physical, was harsh, was often death. So it's an aesthetic that is a life or death aesthetic, and that's why it's often expressed in a way that is either indirect or involves misdirection or inversion. It goes back in African American ways of talking, so that the man couldn't understand what you were saying. He can't punish you if he doesn't know what you've said. Even if he's heard the text of it, it might have inversions of common uses. I think the famous one that one linguist proposed was this term "bad" to mean good. And what if a slave escaped and they said, well, that was a bad slave. That was one bad slave. How can you punish somebody who says, yeah, massa, he was bad? So that's just been hypothesized. And you see that throughout the show. And various types of artists, sometimes it's not even the rural ones who use the roots. Archie Byron, who's in the show, lived in Atlanta his whole life. He grew up, he was a childhood friend of Martin Luther King. He used the roots. So there's no rural or urban connection between whether they use industrialized materials or natural ones. And then I think the second thing, which as a person who's been a resident of the Bay Area, even though I'm a native Atlantan, is the ecological one. The idea of, which you heard Lonnie speak to as well, of respecting everything in the world, even if it doesn't have monetary value, and finding ways to honor the struggle and the existence of everything under the sun. Well, clearly that's a religious type of approach, but it's also a very modern, contemporary, woke approach to the world that we're in.
Jacqueline, I'm wondering if you could talk, given your experience of modernism in the 20th century and your scholarship. There's so many artists, obviously, who have appropriated what we now sometimes call found objects or assemblage, starting with Picasso, if not earlier, who, of course, drew heavily on African art as well. But artists, say American artists, Louise Nevelson, Bruce Conner, Robert Rauschenberg, exactly. Can you talk a little bit about why so many of those artists were classified by modern art museums in the 20th century, or American art museums for that matter, as modernist or avant-garde, and yet other artists are classified as folk? Is it a purely racial construct that they're making this divide, or are there other issues at play as well?
I definitely think there's class, gender, race, ethnicity that's part of it. I also think we have to remember that a lot of these artists who are now part of this canon weren't part of the canon when they were doing this avant-garde work. So we have to remember that something like La Demoiselle d'Avignon, made in 1907, was not really publicly exhibited until the 1920s. So we forget about the risk that artists take. We forget that, a lot of our art histories are really histories not of the entirety of everyone who ever made art, but it's the history of avant-gardism. And so they're the winners, right? And now we celebrate them as if we always have, and we haven't. People were looking at the works of Robert Rauschenberg in the 1950s like he was a madman. Similarly with someone like Dubuffet, who literally said, yes, I actually am a madman. I want you to think of me as a madman. I go to insane asylums to learn from people who are there, and I learn from children. And that's also part of the artist's rhetoric, to say, no, I'm not interested in this certain kind of canon. My whole move is to say that I'm going to very publicly and very decidedly break from it. Then there are artists who are not part of the sort of ruling class, right, who are saying, I'm doing this anyway, right? I'm doing this because I want to do it. I'm doing this because I have to do it, right? People always say that artists should say to themselves, is there something else I could be doing? And if the answer is yes, then you should go and do it. Because being an artist is not, an easy thing. I don't know if that answers your question in part. Let me know if you want me to keep on rattling.
That's good. But if I might say
please.
something.
No, absolutely, of course.
Art for me was more of a healer. It was more, and I think for some other artists, I've seen a lot of artists, I met a lot of these artists that's in the show before they died. I met them, I looked at their character, I looked at their respect for what they had learned that they were, because they too didn't know anything about art. They too was just doing what normally would be done by a people that had only materials that they can reuse. As you know, and on the plantations, the slaves only used what their masters could not find any values in. So we was always taught to rubbish through the trash, the garbage and the debris, to find what we need to find. A lot of times we move ahead of that because we have moved into a society now where we got jobs, and we moved away from working in the fields, and we moved away, again, migration, like Danny was talking about, moving from one real harsh labor output to another. But always, if you look at the African Americans or blacks in America, or back to colors of America, the Negroes of America, they look forward to working. They got up on their own when the sun or when the rooster crowed. They got up. They didn't just lay there, which they could have laid there and been rebellious. So, I don't feel like going to work today. You understand what I'm saying? But they got up. We got used to doing something in America. We got used to making America great. You understand what I'm saying? And once we got used to making this building and struggling and toting and pulling and lifting, because you got to remember there wasn't no machinery back there. So Mr. Edmondson sculpturing that hard stone taught me something. When I got over to the sandstone, I started sculpturing it as a tombstone, but then when I found out that I could go into schools and give some of it away, because I had so much of it, I had piles and piles of this material. I've always been a giving artist, but also I was receiving something. I was receiving a joy. I didn't have to no longer think about, in Alabama Industrial School, after getting whooped and having both of my thighs and things busted, laying there on the ground and having to crawl. I didn't have to think about that, and I could do a piece of art and call it Blood on the Rock Pile and walk away from that and left that on that art. So that's what was happening here. You are seeing these artists daily struggle. They put it into something and they left it there and they moved on. Art allows us to move on. Can you understand what I'm saying? See, that I think you all asked me to come up here where I can help clarify something of how did these artists, these artists do what they did to help others see that these are the factors, these are the material values that have been left behind for you all. I don't have a problem with copy. I don't have a problem with, oh, yes, I'm a great pretender. I pretended for a long time that I was smart. I didn't know any. I didn't know how to read and write. It was I was denied that in Alabama Industrial School. There was no schooling for us. So by being denied the right to learn, I struggled to learn beyond that. And I'm thankful to Mr. William Arnett for giving me an opportunity to show what I had learned. But they even destroyed that. They kept hurting you. I mean, most of these artists that you see, their works was damned by their own people. They was damned by the preachers. They was damned by the congregations. Because that don't belong in the church. It's too dirty, it's too nasty. And when you get up to testify about it, your testimony period, they didn't want it. Because you wasn't talking clean stuff. You wasn't talking something pretty and shiny. Can you dig it? And now this art has made it to a point where it can show off its meaning. You see all that stuff hanging in there, that burnt stuff? Time I walked in there, I saw the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing of the 4 little girls that lost their lives, and I saw my grandmama up on the hill in Woodlawn digging the graves for 3 of those little girls. My grandmother helped dug their grave. My grandmama told me, come here, help me dig this grave. And I jumped out the grave and wanted to run and play with my friend. She called me back. She said, come here. She said, you cannot bury a straight coffin in a crooked hole. She told me to straighten that hole out. This is my experience. And I brought it here. Well, Bill allowed it to come here to the Dion to be the truth. That's all, the truth. That's all. I don't have nothing else to say but the truth.
Truth is always the best thing to say. Actually, that sort of leads into a question I wanted to ask all of you, which is, many of us are not from the South, some of us are. The South has been in the news a lot recently for many not so great reasons. The massacre in Charleston, Confederate flags flying over state houses, Confederate monuments being removed or not removed, the killing of unarmed African Americans by police officers and so forth. I wanted to ask all of you the ways in which you think the South has or has not changed. I think also there's this misperception or myth, and Lonnie just touched on it, that somehow with the birth of the modern civil rights movement in the 50s and 60s, maybe from Emmett Till forward through MLK, that somehow so much of the promise had been achieved. But in fact, my experience, and I'm not a Southerner, but having spent time there, is that there's a time lag, that things that people think or hoped had been achieved actually have not been achieved or not achieved fully. That's not to say there's no progress. But as Lonnie just said, I mean, if you calculate Lonnie's age, he's not talking about the 1930s or 40s. This is, modern living experience. It's his experience. And it's way more complicated and unfortunately has far more negativity, which he has transformed into positive energy and works of art. But I'm wondering, especially Paul, you were born in Atlanta, Lonnie, you're from Alabama, if you could talk a little about it. Has the South really changed or not? How has this work been received in the South or not by their museums, including museums in your own backyard? And is there change happening or not? Or is this work being recognized more by museums outside of the South who aren't politically or racially invested in keeping it marginalized in some way?
I'll take that one. I was born in Washington, D.C. Okay. 1987, Lonnie got interested in the concept that there were artists like himself. And that was through my dad. And I graduated from college in June 1987, and this little preppy-looking guy, and Lonnie and I went out on the road around the South to meet artists, many of whom, practically all of whom were in this show. Mose Tolliver and Mary T. Smith, Son Thomas. I don't think you have any Son Thomases, do you? Joe Light, Hawkins Bolden. Do you have any Hawkins Bolden? Who else did we see? He's in Miami. That was out of our. So we spent about a week on the road and a lot of time in Mississippi. And Lonnie looked remarkably like he does now. And in 1987, a white kid and a black guy with dreadlocks, we often wouldn't be served in restaurants. It just wasn't done. That people like us travel together in their experience. Lonnie will remember some of those times.
One time scared the hell out of me. Excuse me, because me and Paul had kind of ventured off into, we was exploring a little bit, but yet and still we was looking, especially my curiosity just jerked me. I'm going all over the place, especially in a cotton gin, in a place where I've never been in there before, and I'm trying to see how this happened and that happened. Tell them a little bit more about that, Paul.
Apparently they'd had some kind of industrial accident there the week before, so our curiosity was mistaken for investigative reporting. And one of the workers pulled Lonnie aside and said, management is putting together a goon squad to come after you guys. You better get out of here now. Lonnie pulled me aside and basically said, run.
That's all I can do, you know. We're in Mississippi.
So we're running through a cotton gin, but which is basically like a big factory, you know, with these goons running after us. And so that's not that long ago. So when you say has it changed, I think, well, I mean, has it changed? Look at the easy way that so much of this racial ugliness has risen from the grave. All too easily, you know. It's like the zombies were warmed up in their coffins, just waiting for any kind of dog whistle to get active.
I think it just need to be fixed, though. I think if we can really get those humans that is actually feeling either left out or that somebody is going to invade their turf or find out some of their prior skeletons that's in the closets or all of these things. I think my thing is I don't want to see women wearing out their shoes marching all across America unnecessarily to try to achieve further or possibilities for their woundsmithing because of how we are as people and all the lives that we can't do nothing else but honor all the lives that has been lost in recent incidents that has occurred. We can't do anything as but as artists to make art as a tribute or a memorial. A lot of times you all understand the memorialism that's in this show. The memorial values. Dr. King said there's a moral and a memorial value that we as humans have to live daily. We have to respect that. And in that respect, we can then post that and say, I understand that. I understand everything that's going on. I even understand how children could get a brand new iPhone and treat it like a toy. You understand what I'm saying? But yet and still point that cam at somebody just to get a like, they starting a fight. Can you dig what I'm saying? I'm saying these are things that we're looking at as artists, and we're doctoring on it. Mr. Dow just recently died. If you look at a lot of his works, and a lot of his works incorporated our subject manner. I have to, somebody say, you create all these new words. It's all right. I'm a wordsmith. But listen, subject matter, because what we're doing is we're trying to take this here and work the combination to our right. Our right got a combination. It has to be worked. And we have to fix it. We have to say, okay, we're dealing in a digital age. Let's get digital. Okay? I'm saying to all the students with every little thing that I can post, we are Mother Universe students. So let's get student smithing. As students, let's work it like a blacksmith or a goldsmith. Let's work that smithing. Let's work the hell out of that smithing, but not in a negative. I mean, all the colleges and institutions and all the schools and everything, if they come to the Dion, they're going to see this in the art. And we're welcoming them to do that. Thanks to William Arnett, thanks to the director, thanks to the curator. These things are here now. But respect them as any other art in here. Because if they are not respected, what's going to happen? Riots are going. And we're trying, the only thing this hand is doing is saying, let's not riot America. Okay, America, we're going to agree that you're still growing in your wonder. America is one of the world's leading wonders. Not wonderful, not great, but the greatness is yet to come. The babies that's going to take care of great. You know what I'm saying? Muhammad Ali say, I sting like a butterfly and float like a bee. No, it's the reverse of that. I'll sting you like a bee and float over you like a butterfly. But everything going to the clouds, so I ain't trying to be funny, but y'all putting it there. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, actually, I brought a quote by Martin Luther King, who, as you know, his presence is throughout the exhibition in many places, not simply in the photograph of him in Memphis on the balcony of the Lorraine Hotel, but also in Thornton Dial's incredible work, Blood and Meat, Survival for the World, which is this extraordinary maelstrom and visceral tangle of unwoven rope carpet, sort of the actually I need a word from Lonnie, unraveling of American society in the 1960s that resulted in the assassination of King and both Kennedys, who are also in that painting, that construction. And dead center, so to speak, unfortunately, is Emmett Till. He had watched the Eyes on the Prize documentary and been very moved by the story of 14-year-old Emmett Till from Chicago, goes to Money, Mississippi, supposedly whistles at a white woman, is kidnapped that night, tortured all night, and then finally shot and killed and thrown in the river. And you all know the story of Mamie Till, who not only allowed him to be photographed and was published in Jet magazine so the nation could see the horrors of lynching and Jim Crow segregation in the South, but also so that people would come to the funeral. She had an open glass casket where they could see, as she said, what they did to my boy, what they did to my child. And so MLK is a huge influence. Thornton Dial talked about him. MLK was the freedom cat who really gave a lot of artists the potential and power to sort of make their works. And he has this wonderful quote, which a lot of you probably know. He said, "True pacifism or nonviolent resistance is a courageous confrontation of evil by the power of love." And that kind of sounds like what you were talking about, Lonnie. It's not about rioting. It's about having the force of art and creativity to effect change.
It's about understanding this. I mean, the bloodshed of billions of peoples are from, I sung last night, I snuck off the slave ship in my imagination just to see what we as a people was going to turn out to be. And I ended up on a probe being probed away to the farthest distance of space. So I snuck off for one ship to sneak on another. These are where we supposed to be. I did a piece called Six Space Shuttles, a piece of music called Six Space Shuttles and 144,000 Elephants. I don't want to see 144,000 elephants parading around on Earth. I'm not the Ringling Brothers Circus, but I want to see us move towards elephant power. I want to see us move towards solar energy, where we're not causing the carbon in the air that's choking and killing. It's killing people by the millions. And if you don't believe me, take a census or just request a census for the Dion. It can let us know some stuff, but we're talking about we're moving into the future. So I was telling Matt the other day, I told him this morning, we might as well do this digitally. Because if we're bringing this information, we want to give it to the future as positive, but as is. Yeah, you ever notice an as is thing? When you buy it, you got that. You can't take it back. Okay? So whatever our universal right now, whatever our global and our universal efforts are, it's as is. But let's take that. Let's take that. I'm not your preacher. I'm not your minister. But I am advising to every king and every queen. Why would I say 6 space shuttles and 144,000 elephants for a queen's birthday? If I didn't do 6, she can't ride no 6 space shuttles at one time. That means get 5 of her queen friends and they go taking off in the universe together. Can you dig that? You like that? I like that. And then when they come back, they can do their exploration, can heal some things. But the answer to you is we are the doctor, and the art is the medicine, and we're giving them a shot.
So I want to ask Paul and Jacqueline both if they have anything else they'd like to say.
The only thing I would like to say, just like my only big idea, is, it sort of goes back to what Danny Glover was saying in his introduction when he's in the show, and he sees these are the dreams, the desires, the stories, the histories, the memories. Well, all of that in the era of even Emmett Till, which I think was 64, 55, I'm sorry, I don't know what I was saying, was forbidden. And so the acquisition of voice, Lonnie clearly has acquired one, is what this work is about. And with that voice, there's kind of this twofold mandate. It's the documentary mandate, which is to tell these unknown and even forbidden histories through work. And the other one, which we've heard with the 6 space shuttles and the 144,000 elephants, is a visionary mandate to use that accumulated wisdom and give voice to visions and idealizations of what we must do to leave a better as-is future. So that tension is in all the work. Less so, obviously, in the quilts because it's a very abstract medium. But every artist I know has felt that dual responsibility to bear witness and to be a visionary at the same time.
And I think the quilts also, Paul. I think if you look at the quilts, I don't know whether a lot of you all been through the exhibit. The quilts are echoing out away the patterns of the materials, the symbols. You got to look at the quilts and think about what Bill was trying to bring forth with the idea of what did the quilters have in their houses as an inspiration. A lot back in those days, especially in the earlier periods, the paper, the newspapers that was on the wall, all the subject matter that was in those newspapers, where they said that we wasn't interested in learning or we didn't learn to read and write. We had the best of you all's throwaway to examine. You understand? So we was an aftermath of you all's educated manner. You throwed it away and we got it. All your National Geographic, all your books now that you don't want, they're being thrown into the trash. So 9 times out of 10, your trash collectors is the first to find the goodies. And they separate the goodies. But they try to take them home. But we're getting away from home research like we were. My whole thing is, Malcolm say by any means necessary. That's what Malcolm X said. But my thing is to get them away from the weapons and see that all of this stuff is your means. By any means, all of this, every plank on this floor, instead of me seeing a kid just deny himself or herself opportunity, I want to show them the patterns that's in each plank. I want to show them the grooves, the pine knots, and what a knot mean. You understand what I'm saying? A knot is to be or not to be. A knot, you can't, you see? But that's what, the poetic manner. Somebody said, do you think you can do good on Broadway? I am Broadway. How about Hollywood? I am Holly, but you know, I had to do my thing in the woods. Again, thank you all, and thumbs up for Mother Universe, humans. Thumbs up for Mother Universe. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, sister.
Okay. No one wants to follow Lonnie, and I'm not going to. So I brought in a ringer. I mentioned Louisiana couldn't be with us, and she really wanted to be here. And again, as I said, we're sending her our good wishes for her family. So I'm going to read something that she said instead to close. We were just talking about quilts. And Lonnie is absolutely right. One of my favorites is by Annie Mae Young. It's the one made out of worn work jeans, blue jeans. You see the wear on the tear on the knees. Every one of those is worn by somebody in the family or somebody in the community or somebody next door. And she is a little girl, just like Thornton Dial, just like lots of people, worked in the fields, picked cotton, sharecropping, and every time you look at that quilt hanging in the gallery, which is so astonishingly beautiful, it carries those memories, it carries those associations, it carries that history. It's there, you can see it. It's worn, it's frayed, it's torn, but it's loved and used, and it keeps you warm. But it's also, it always reminds us of the furrows of the fields that she tilled. They're vertical strips of blue jeans. So I want to read Louisiana Bendoff. I was 12 years old when I made my first quilt. It was a housetop quilt. I can't remember what colors it was, but it was made from scraps that were left over from the clothes my mother had made for the kids. She made almost all the clothes we wore in those days. The scraps that were left over from those clothes always ended up in the quilts. Nothing went to waste. My great-grandmother, Annie Petway, died in June of that year. My brother, sister, and I were sitting on the porch, barefooted, when the hearse pulled up. It was long and black, and the people got out, and they went into the room where she was, and they put her in a black bag. And then they carried her away. I remember sitting there and crying as she was taken away. Sometimes I sit and picture her face, and I can still feel her smile. In 2002, my mom invited me to go with her to Houston for the opening of the G's Ben quilt exhibit. When I got to my great-grandmother's quilt in the museum, I cried. I cried to see our history and our past up on the walls and realize my great-grandmother had left a legacy. She was gone. We hadn't forgotten her, but no one else in the world knew who she was. And then to see her quilt hanging up on the wall, it was so beautiful. When she had died, she was just our great-grandmother, but now she had been reborn as someone who people were respecting. And all of a sudden, she was important to the other people in a way she had only been important to us. It brought tears to my eyes, and I was so overjoyed inside. When I saw her beautiful artwork on the wall, it took me back in time, back to a time before I knew her, before I was born, when she was a whole person with all of her abilities. She never got to go places or do anything. I felt like in spirit she was there with her quilt and with me. I remember how she used to pray for better things for her children. And I remember when I saw her quilt, I could see her face so plain, and I felt like she could see it too. When I travel now, she is there with me. She is now known all over the world. In a way, she's still alive in that quilt. So thank you, Louisiana Bendoff, and thank you, panel. And now, Julian Cox, Chief Curator of the Museums, will introduce Delroy Lindo.
Thank you very much to our panelists for a wonderful, wonderful conversation, stimulating, full of great ideas and messages for us to take out into our lives as we go forward. Now, just to wrap up proceedings, it's my great pleasure to introduce Delroy Lindo, the distinguished British-born American actor and theatre director. Delroy has been nominated for Tony and Screen Actors Guild Awards and is a recipient of the Satellite Award. He's perhaps best known for his roles in a trio of Spike Lee films, most notably as West Indian Archie in Malcolm X and as Woody Carmichael in Crooklyn. He also starred as Bo Catlett in Get Shorty and as Arthur Rose in The Cider House Rules. And he also performed the role of Satchel Paige, the great Cleveland Indians and St. Louis Browns pitcher in the film Soul of the Game. Beginning in 2007, he began a rich association with the Berkeley Repertory Theatre just across the bay, where he's directed several productions, while in 2010 he performed in David Land's production of Joe Turner at the Young Vic Theatre in London. He's married to Nashorme Lindo, a highly accomplished artist, educator and historian who has been a good friend to us here at the Fine Arts Museums and in the past generously assisted our education department with several museum projects related to the history of African American art. Delroy himself donated his voice to an important multimedia project we did when this museum reopened in 2005 and provided some language accompanying our great Aaron Douglas painting, Aspiration, from 1936. So please join me in welcoming Delroy Lindo.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. First of all, thank you again to our panelists, to Jacqueline, Lonnie, Tim, and to Paul. Thank you so much. As somebody who makes a living interpreting the works of others, I have an added appreciation, a deep appreciation for the artists who are exhibited here in the Revelations exhibit. And the basis of the appreciation has to do with the fact that they follow their own creative instincts to produce work that is wholly original, wholly singular in its vision. Before I go on, I need to thank Danny Glover. Danny, and anybody who's ever heard me speak, and Danny is in whether Danny is present or not, I've learned so much from Danny Glover in terms of the way that he lives his life, the way that he has transformed his celebrity in a way that not only speaks truth to power, but time and time and time again, Danny has put his career on the line, in some instances his life on the line, and you've been an extraordinary example to me, so thank you for that. I was speaking about originality and singularity of work, and when I think about these things, singularity of work, originality of work, and genius, I would be completely remiss standing here if I did not acknowledge somebody who is right here in the Bay Area, right here in our midst, and embodies the genius, the singularity, and vision that is always present in her work. If we could bring the lights up, I'd like to acknowledge Mildred Howard, who is here. This morning, in anticipation of coming here, I looked, we happen to own the books, and now I'm blanking. Soul's Grown Deep. And I looked through both volumes, big volumes. And I looked through all of them. And one of the things, I could say a lot of things, but one of the things that occurs to me about the work there, these works are totems. They're totems. And in terms of, and then when that occurred to me, I went to the dictionary and I looked up the definition for the word totem. A totem is a natural object or animal believed by a particular society to have a spiritual significance and adopted by it as an emblem. And one of the words that popped out at me when I read those words has to do with belief. The depth of the belief that is present in this work, and you take that belief and you create. That's brilliant, singular, visionary art. And that is what, for me, this exhibit represents. The fact that it is called Revelations, very apt title as far as I'm concerned, because it represents a particular way of seeing and revealing the world to us that come in contact with that work. And that work and those journeys are ever more impressive because traditionally they have been made outside of the parameters and without the support of the established arts institutions in this country. And so given, and as you mentioned in the beginning, outside of what, right? These artists being referred to as, vernacular or outsider artists. So to the extent that these outsider artists are now invited into an institution such as the Young, is an extraordinary cultural and national and even historical happening. Now, as many of you know, many African Americans do not feel connections to the visual arts institutions who have excluded their contributions over the decades. So from this standpoint also, I would say it is a wonderful opportunity for all of us to share, not only share in this event, but also to broaden the recognition of the importance of this event. How can we do that? The fact that these works will be exhibited over the next 10 months gives us all plenty of opportunity to come and see the work, to come back and see the work as many times as we wish, and then, importantly, to take whatever our impressions are and to share them in our respective communities. And that's a way that we can then, through word of mouth, spread the significance of this event here at the Young. The museum, I'm told, is putting together advisory groups of individuals who will be assisting in this. Now, I'm holding up here Get Involved flyers. You can find the Get Involved flyers at the links information table in the Wilsey Court. So I'd like to encourage everybody on their way out to stop and pick up one of these Get Involved flyers. Just so that you don't feel you're overcommitting, I'm told that the training is not too arduous, and there is a genuine desire from the museum to hear from community voices about this exhibit, which will help connect the public to the work here. Information about becoming a community representative is also included in the Get Involved with Revelations flyer. And the hope here is to have a long and successful run for this exhibit. And the fact of the matter is the success of this exhibit really depends on all of us involving ourselves, becoming involved. So I hope you'll respond to the flyer. I understand that I may be preaching to the choir here, but we all know that we all have a responsibility to get the word out and critically to help educate, if that's the word, other museums, not only in terms of giving these artists the recognition that they so deeply deserve, but also to help other museums understand that rather than doing these artists a favor by including their works, rather they are engaging in a very smart and successful business and creative move. Thank you for being here. Thank you to the panel. Thanks very much. Thanks.
Okay. All right. Shall I put you on the spot? You can get it done.
Sure,
and get it
why
over
not?
with. Why not?
Sure.
Yeah, go
What?
ahead. So this was a unique experience for me.
Yes.
So it must be somewhat of a unique
Very
experience
unique for me.
So what
Absolutely.
do you feel leaving?
I was thrilled to see, looking up in this auditorium and seeing the people in this auditorium who have never been here before, and I hope will be here many times again when they realize we're serious about this. We're really serious about this exhibition. We're serious about bringing these artists and more of them. And this was only 62 works, 22 artists. There's many more where they came from. And I was thrilled because I think it shows a sincere interest on the part of the Fine Arts Museums that they probably didn't realize we really meant until you get Belva Davis on the project, and then they know we're serious. And I'm very, very proud of that.
Well, I can't even claim any credit, really, for doing anything special, because I am one of those children of the South. I was born in Louisiana. I lived in a family where we left because my uncle was going to be tarred and feathered. So I owed, when I started all of this, or when I started this conversation, to them to do what I could. I mean, I don't know why I was selected to be standing next to you, but I know one thing, I had to darn well make the best of that opportunity and to do what we could to bring this kind of talent and this kind of emotion and feeling to our community. So for that, I thank the museum and I thank you.
But that's why you get all the credit, because there's a lot of other people who were born in the South and had some advantages and terrible disadvantages to begin with, but they're not standing here in this museum and they didn't bring this collection. And you are the spark plug. So I think you get tremendous credit.
Well, your credit is that you listen to your heart.
Wow.
And that is unique.
Well.
Many of us listen to our hearts.
Yeah.
And then we let our minds overrule it.
Well, that's what's the matter with your mind. That's why I don't listen to my mind, or I'm out of my mind.
Well, anyway, it's been my pleasure working with you on this.
Oh, Belva.
And I got to tell you, it's a thrill of my life.
Thank you. It's actually the thrill of my life, too. And working with you is always a pleasure. And sometimes we don't listen to our minds, and we do really good work that way. Right?
Love it.
Yeah.
Okay.